What's up, y'all? My name is Anthony. I'm a polyglot who's taught myself 6 languages, and I'm taking up number 7 this year. Today, I want to talk a little bit about my history learning languages and how I've used this same method to learn all 6 and coming up on 7 of them so that you can get to know a little bit better. So the first language I ever started out with was Spanish, right? I took Spanish from 7th grade on. I was maybe 13 years old. I took it 7th, 8th, 9th grade. And right as I got into 10th grade, this was the first time I took like a conversation class where we essentially just got to sit around and talk for the entire class. And that for me was like a huge moment, right? But I want you guys to keep in mind like the time span it took me to get to that point. This was like the first time in Spanish where I felt like confident to kind of start to express myself, right? And that took 4 years. You definitely don't need 4 years. The system that is in place in schools is incredibly inefficient. As I've discovered, the more languages I've learned, the more I've realized like this can be a lot quicker. You don't need to spend 4 years to be able to just have a conversation. That year was also the first year I went to the Dominican Republic. And that was a huge motivator for me to like want to continue to learn this language because I noticed that I had an entirely different experience than the other people who I was with on this mission trip. I got the chance to talk to Tomas, one of the pastors, and really get into conversation with him, the missionaries as well. I was able to interact with the kids, ask questions to the family, right? Obviously, like the Spanish was very basic that I knew at this point, right? And again, I think that more has to do with the system than the ability to learn languages. I think learning languages is rather easy. And if you follow like a good plan, you can definitely make much quicker progress. Like I've seen people get to the point where it took me 4 years to get in like 6 months of class. And so I was able to like go and enjoy my time while I was there. I was able to go play baseball with the kids. I remember asking the missionary like, hey, I'm gonna go play baseball with these kids. Is that okay? He was like, yeah, you're fine. You speak Spanish, and just kind of let me go off and wander off on my own in this little town where we were at in the Dominican Republic. I subsequently continued to study as a junior. I finished up Spanish 4. I took Spanish 3 and like that conversation class in my sophomore year. And as a junior, I took Spanish 4, which was the most we had. And then beyond that, I went back to the Dominican Republic as a junior. I went to Nicaragua as a senior and then as a freshman in college. I ended up studying Spanish actually in college. That was really interesting because like when I first got to college, I had tested out of basically my first year. I tested into like high 200 level of Spanish. I tested into 300 level of German. I'll get to that in a second. And then like 200 level of French as a college freshman. So I went study Spanish. I went to Spain my second year as I lived in Spain. That was an incredible experience. The first year I noticed that I spent a lot of time with gringos, a lot of time with people from the States. And so that was one thing that the second semester I was there, I really explicitly focused on getting out of because I found that while the classes were more or less interesting, I was just stuck with a bunch of people who, being Americans, weren't super interested in learning Spanish. They were mostly just there to have a good time on study abroad, you know, and that's not really what I wanted. So like the second semester, I made 3 big changes. One, I took classes within the actual faculty. I took classes in the like translation and interpretation department of the University of Granada. I started to hang out more with the Erasmus students. This was a really interesting experience because whereas like with the Americans the first semester, they mostly just wanted to speak English. Here you had people from all over Europe who were actively trying to learn the language, right? Like they were actually interested in learning the language. You'd be out at parties and things. And that even if there were 2 French people who speaking, you know, maybe if it was just them, they would speak French. But for the most part, they were speaking Spanish. They were trying to speak Spanish. And this for me gave me the idea once I started teaching of like the idea of group classes and learning with other learners is because the one thing I noticed about the Erasmus students is that one, they spoke slower, they used less slang, and they just spoke more standard Spanish, right? So they were much easier to understand. And it was during the second semester and hanging out with these Erasmus students that I was really able to improve my confidence, right? To the point to where then I could go and I started to make friends with local Spaniards and I would go hang out with them at the park, right? Or go out with them, right? I found that I was much better able to like continue a conversation and hang in there with them versus like the first semester. And also this is where the point where hanging out with them at the park, well, I would be forced to be around group conversations, which is a whole different level than is just like one-on-one conversations. But by the end of that year, I felt pretty confident. I subsequently moved to Colorado, where I was able to use my Spanish skills with some of the people coming to work on the ski resort from Argentina or South America and places like that. And then obviously I've been living in Mexico for going on 6 years now. I've been teaching Spanish for 5, right, through this school. After Spanish, I started to learn German. I learned German in my senior year of high school is when I started. The whole goal with that was that I wanted to be an engineer. And so I started learning German with the idea that I'm going to go to Germany and be able to study, right? I then ran into calculus, realized that math is not really my thing, and kind of gave up on that. But I realized that I had like this skill for languages, and so I continued to explore that, right? I studied German the entire first semester of my senior year. And then right before the end of that semester, I went and talked to the French teacher. I wasn't able to take French 1. I realized that I needed another class, right, for next semester. So I was like, hey, can I come take French 2? Like, I speak Spanish. The grammar is basically the same. It's just learning the pronunciation, right? And so I studied kind of the basics over the Christmas break of that year, of my senior year. And by the time I joined the class, within like a month, I would say, like, I was the best person in the class, right? Because I had the skill of like learning languages. I understood how the grammar worked. You know, he didn't have to teach me that aspect of it, right? He just had to teach me like the proper pronunciation, and like I had to learn new words and things like that, right? As far as German goes, I continue to study that I studied through like the junior year level of German in college. I studied through like the sophomore year level of French. German, I don't get as much of a chance to practice. I've read some books. I read a little bit of Sherlock Holmes in German at one point, and I get the chance to speak with it. I get the chance to speak it with some friends here in Puerto Escondido. We get to speak a little bit of German, so that's fun. It's definitely a language that is more like dormant right now versus like French, which is pretty active. In the past, I've gotten a chance to practice in France. Kind of difficult. They kind of look down on you if you don't have like a perfect accent. More where I got practice speaking French is in Morocco. I was able to chat and communicate and make friends while I was down there through speaking French, and then having somebody who could translate it to Arabic. So that was cool. And then in the past year, I had for a long time a French tutor who I would meet, and we would have a conversation and be able to speak. And that was before I then went on to read Journey to the Center of the Earth. I've tried to study dozens of languages: Norwegian, Afrikaans, Swahili, none of which are really stuck. Lack of practice, lack of trips coming up. Because for me, the big part of why I learn languages is because I love to travel and I want to be able to connect with people, right? And so without any trips kind of coming up, kind of hard to stick to it, or at least it has been for me in the past. When I was actually in Spain, I started to learn Portuguese. I learned Portuguese basically through reading. I didn't really study too much grammar until kind of later on. I just kind of picked up the book, started to read. I was like, okay, well, this is all basically the same as Spanish. I understood pretty intuitively the grammar of it and was able to pick up on it pretty quickly. And from there on out, it was just practicing the words and the vocabulary, right? I also got the chance when I was in Brazil to practice my Portuguese. I lived there for 2 months a couple years back. So that was really cool. I also do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I get the chance to speak some Portuguese with people who come from Brazil to train in Mexico City. So that's also another opportunity to practice. And I've had at various times in the past, like a tutor with whom to practice. After Portuguese, I started to study Italian. And the reason I started to study Italian was because I had a trip coming up. Because I already have Spanish, I have French, I have Portuguese, it was pretty easy to pick up on the basics of the grammar and feel pretty comfortable in conversation. Now it's, along with German, kind of more of like a dormant language. It wouldn't take me long to kind of reactivate it if I were going to Italy, but since I'm not going to Italy, I don't really have much need to. I would say it's probably solidly at that like A2 level of like but both German and Italian are like at that solid A2 level. French, I would say, is like, and Portuguese is like on that B1 bordering B2 range, if you guys know the CEFR scale. But like Italian, like I can navigate, I can go and order food. And to be 100% honest with you, because of the links with the other languages I speak, I would honestly feel more comfortable in Italian speaking like about history or philosophy, because those words are much more similar to Spanish or Portuguese versus like, I don't necessarily know what the word for fork or spoon or knife is off the top of my head. Like I would have to think about it a little bit more. Interestingly enough, I think I would feel more confident speaking about, more complex topics in Italian versus like German, not as much because the vocab is very different. But solid at that A2, I can have a conversation, make friends, kind of introduce myself and ask people what they're going to do, what they like to do, right? Especially in like one-on-one circumstances. And then Arabic's the language that I've been studying the last 2 years. So Arabic has been interesting because I, in the beginning, kind of abandoned the approach I had taken with the other languages and went more of like a traditional book route. And that led to the first 6 months not making a whole lot of progress. I got really bored and just kind of gave up. Then there was like probably 3 or 4 months where I just didn't do anything. And then at the beginning of 2025, end of 2024, I really buckled down. I was like, I'm going to freaking learn this language. And so I took back to the method that I used with all the other languages and applied it to Arabic, and it went much better, right? Being able to build up a base in the language, being able to talk, right? I'm now very much in that like solid intermediate level where I can have a good conversation, introduce myself, I can order food, I can ask people what they're going to do, what they like to do, things like that. And now since I'm at that intermediate level, what I really just need to do is continue to read more. And if you want to follow along, you can follow me on YouTube and see all this stuff where I'm practicing Arabic, where I'm practicing Portuguese, practicing French, and learning Japanese, which is the language I have set for this year. But yeah, Arabic right now, I'm just focused on reading, improving vocabulary, and continuing to grow, grow my vocabulary, right? And then the last language I'm going to talk about is Japanese. I started at the beginning of February 2026 to learn that language. I'm live streaming it on YouTube and then kind of cutting it up and like taking the lessons I learned from it and making videos out of it. But if you want to go watch me try and learn Japanese, see how quickly I can get through it, be sure to follow me on YouTube, Anthony Mullis, and you'll be able to find all those videos and be able to follow along with that journey. This has been my kind of journey with language learning, of like developing the method that I go about to learn all these languages, which I tested out when I was in Romania. I actually tried to learn a bit of Romanian while I was there for a week. Don't really remember any of it, so not something I retained, but the method worked when I was there. In a future video, I'm going to talk about the methodology I use in terms of what the 4 stages I try and get through in the languages, kind of rank my languages based on where they fall in that scale, and then talk about the path I go through in order to pick up a new language, which is the exact method that I'm applying to try to learn Japanese. So throughout the course of this year, you're going to get a chance to see how effective it actually is and does it actually work. Thank you guys so much. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you guys want to join the new self-study online program that we're offering, be sure to send me a message on WhatsApp, via email. All that stuff is going to be linked down below. I hope to see you soon in class.